This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for How to Super Age with Elise Marie Collins. I have to say something at the beginning of this show. Last week, when I put up Elise's podcast, my fingers sort of like got ahead of me, and I spelled Elise incorrectly, but it is corrected now. So we all know that is How to Super Age with Elise Marie Collins. So I have to admit that I'm not a perfect person, but I'm trying to learn how to super age. So Elise, tell us a little bit about the book and what we're going to talk about today.
Okay, great. Well, my book, which is what this podcast is based on, How to Super Age. And one of my yoga teachers actually says, how human of you, how human of you. And I love that phrase because we're all human. Sometimes we think or we're trying to be perfect, but God knows that's not going to be good for our health. Let's just put it that way. So I just have a question to everyone in the audience. Have you ever thought about what am I going to do or be when I get older?
Oh,
and
yeah.
What do I mean by older? Because actually every day we're getting older, including my dog. If she might pop up in the podcast and you might see her, and every day we're getting older. My name is Elise Marie Collins, as Karen introduced me. And I struggled with my aging identity. I mean, I think at every age, I was always like, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to be? I just didn't feel like I fit the paradigm around me. So that's why I wrote this book, because I wanted to look younger, have more energy, a better memory, and live a long and healthy life, and not look better like be in a Hollywood movie or get a facelift. But I taught yoga and I teach yoga now, even in person again. And I would see the looks on my students when they came in, and I don't even want to, sometimes I don't want to say it because it sounds really ageist, but they look harried and frustrated, or, their faces looked almost like there was a shroud around them. And then they would leave and they just look so different. So that's what I wanted to bring to people. And that's what I've gotten from my yoga practice. That's how I help people. So I wanted to inspire people. I filled my book with stories, and stories is a key word today, because now I'm going to introduce our lovely guest today. I'm so excited because I also know her personally, which is always wonderful. I mean, a lot of my guests I meet and they come on the show and we have a great time. I always pick good guests, but this one today is a great, awesome guest, and she's a storyteller. Kate Ferrell, besides being a storyteller, she's also an author, a librarian, and she founded something called the Word Weaving Storyteller Project. She's published numerous educational materials on storytelling as a teaching strategy. Stories hit our brain in a different way. If I just tell you how to do things, it doesn't really go in there. But if I tell you a story, it goes much deeper, I think, into our spirit. That's me. Kate has contributed to and edited award-winning anthologies of personal narrative. One of them was Times They Were A-Changing, Women Remember the 60s and 70s, and another one called Cry of the Nightbird, Writers Against Domestic Violence. Farrell's award-winning new book, I think she's going to be holding it up, is a timely how-to guide on the art of storytelling for adults. Story Power, Secrets to Creating, Crafting, and Telling Memorable Stories. Kate offers virtual workshops for libraries and writing groups, as well as performing virtually as a storyteller. Is there anything else you want to add to that? You want to hold up your book again if you're
Sure. Thank you so much, Elise and Karen. I'm really excited to be here today and talk a little bit more about Story Power and my book. What I'd like to say is I just recently celebrated my 80th birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I've been 80 for almost a week. And I feel very celebrated by friends and family, more so this year than ever. And writing, so what I wanted to share is that writing Story Power, which I wrote in my retirement, a retired educator, was a trigger because I had to write examples, samples of my own personal stories for each one of the 9 themes that I presented in the book. And they triggered all these memories, especially of my younger years. So after, the book launched and the lockdown, first the lockdown began, the book launched. Oh, it was just a very, very difficult, challenging time. But I began to write my memoir. And then, and really going way back from the beginning, because I had to do that for the book. And when the Black Lives Matter movement took hold that summer, I began to then look at my life story and how it intersected with Black and Brown people in a very organic, connected way. And that was braided into my own journey. And that became very exciting to me because I wanted to show that, okay, I was a white girl in the South, but I had so many connections to the Black and Latinx community that were deep and long lasting. And so it changed the context for my memoir. And now I've almost completed the first draft. I've worked with a developmental editor, and I'm only going to write about the first 40 years, sort of beginning with my birth, difficult childhood, abusive mother, and then ending with my own son's birth when I was 40, and sort of breaking the cycle of abuse. But the journey along the way of self-discovery in all these different environments. So
Wow.
I'm very excited about it. And I think that once you get started with telling your story, you really don't know where it might go and who might be the audience, and just be open to, finding your own way with your personal story.
Absolutely.
And I just wanted to mention, we're going to share all your links. Kate does storytelling online, and her storytelling is always fabulous. So lean in when you see her on any bill of storytellers or writers, authors. I always learn something, and I always get a good story. And I feel like stories really touch our heart. So maybe if you have anything, why do they go straight to the heart, not just the mind, Kate?
Okay. Well, when so you mentioned the word weaving storytelling project, and I was able to fund it and use storytelling strategies across the entire state of California. And when that happened, I had so many county officers, curriculum developers, statewide, local, smart people. And we continue to research that very thing. What we discovered is that stories taught, and I think it's been shown even in the corporate world, through marketing and sales, is that it involves the whole brain. It touches on the memory, which is in the back. It works with the front lobe, which is, your logical brain, but also all aspects, because you're in the story with sensory details, with visualization, with structure. So it is one of those media that really soaks into you, and you become so engaged in it. But in addition to that, because we live in sequential action, right? Things happen in real time.
Sure.
And a story takes place beginning, middle, end. I said that too fast. Beginning, middle, and end. And so the rising action, the falling action mimics life, how we experience life. And if we're telling it, authentically, a true story, a story that touches us, it has to be connecting your audience. And when that happens, your audience starts to live your story because they're seeing it, they're feeling it, they're in your shoes. And that's where the heart connection takes place.
Wow. Thank you for
Yeah.
breaking that down. That was amazing. I just wanted to ask you, I think you have something else to say, but I also wanted to ask you about how you started. What inspired you to become a librarian and an educator? Because you're so good at that. You speak slowly, you let us really enter your world. So tell us a little bit about how you started your career.
Right. So I became a teacher first thing. And I was a teacher of English and history, social studies, graduated with degree, credential in San Francisco State. But this was in the mid 60s, during the time of what we called then, maybe Karen remembers, the race riots,
Absolutely.
the hot summers. Remember, it was big in Cleveland and Detroit, but also in Los Angeles. And there were kind of rumors and unrest, never a riot, but unrest in San Francisco. Young, new teachers were always and probably still assigned to the most difficult schools.
Absolutely.
Period. We called them the death row schools because the only way to get out of them was to quit. Or if you could manage to stay long enough to get seniority, you might be able to request a transfer. So along with, and whoever got a chance for a transfer did that. So I was assigned in 1966 to a school in the Bayview, one of the most difficult schools. It was a junior high school in the Bayview. And that is then much more so, but still today, a ghetto school. And I saw this systemic racism in public education firsthand. I used to stand at the door of my classroom as required during changing of the class. And I would see the students, bouncing around, just masses. We were overcrowded. And I would just slump against the door. I would just think to myself, what a waste. What a waste. These students could barely read or write. They had been passed along from one grade to the other. It's what we call social promotion by age. So they did not have even the most basic skills. Okay, so here I was the first year trying to teach English and history. And I had been trained to teach appreciation of English literature, not how to teach reading. So I hated the fact that I would have to fail my students, that they would be flunking my class because they couldn't read or write. So this was a huge dilemma, right? So I felt it, I couldn't accept it. I didn't know what to do about it. So right across the hall from me, in my homeroom on the second floor, was the library, the school library. And when I went over and visited the library during my prep, I was able to talk to some of the most difficult students who acted out and fought me during class. And I could just chat with them and be their friends because there was no testing in the library, no grade to pass. I was there to find a book they might like or just chat about what was important. It was a safe place in the school. So I determined to go to graduate school, apply to UC Berkeley library school, a year program, and specialize as a children's librarian. But when I returned, when I graduated, I wasn't interested in being in the public library. I wanted to go back into the schools. And I knew by then, because of Johnson and the Great Society, that federal funds were being funneled to the most at-risk schools, and they could fund librarians. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a librarian in an at-risk school and open the door to reading and books with excitement and stories and book talks and connect with the teachers as well. So that we could team teach at the elementary level. So I could tell the story, provide the books, and they could do the vocabulary drill, so it became a workable idea. And yet I continue to be a friend and provide a safe space.
Wow, that's amazing. That's an amazing story. And clearly libraries are filled with stories. How did you become a storyteller in addition to a librarian? Because I know how skilled you are at storytelling. What's the bridge to the storytelling?
Well, I should back up and say that in my first year teaching at this school, which is legendary, I have to say, it no longer exists. The building was torn down, but anyone who grew up or knows the Bayview knew of Portala Junior High. It was crazy. So in those years, but one day after lunch, I had a 9th grade class, which is a horrible time of the day. And it was an overcrowded, hot classroom. And I had learned how to reach my students by reading aloud from the assigned text. They couldn't read it, I'll read it. And then we'll discuss it. And we'll have a response to literature, which was great. But this one day I was sick and tired of reading aloud these Greek myths from this boring old book. And I walked away from my lectern, stood in front of the class, away from my protective barrier lectern. And I began to tell them the story of Daphne and Apollo in my own words. And that was my first real storytelling in the schools. Now, these were 9th grade tough kids. Some of them looked like they were 35 years, about as old as your son. And they had tattoos and they were out there. So I started just telling them, like, you remember, don't you, how Cupid has this bow and arrow? And just started right in with the story of how Apollo saw Daphne down in the forest in her beautiful, floral garments, and he fell in love. No, maybe it was Cupid who hit him with one of the arrows. But Apollo was so enamored of Daphne as he was up in his chariot with the sun behind him as he pulled it through the arc of the heavens every day, that he jumped from his chariot and pursued her. Now, as I told this chase scene story of Apollo chasing Daphne through the woods, the class and I were there. We were inside that story, and they were looking at me with more attention than they'd ever given me, but they weren't seeing me. They were seeing the story. And then at the end, it was so magical. The whole room was just silent because Daphne changed into the laurel tree, forever honored by the god. So I knew that it was a spectacular kind of art, and particularly for at-risk students, for all the reasons you mentioned. It's bonding. It connected us heart to heart. We were involved in one another's vision. We were creating a common creative reality. But I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't even know the word storytelling. So when I went to library school and wanted to be a children's librarian, one of the classes is the art of storytelling, the traditional art. And the techniques that we were taught were originally from France and England, and then came through the New York Public Library, the supervisor of storytelling. And those are the techniques that we learned. They were very specific. We were tested, we tried it out, we were, field tested. And so I finally learned not only the professional techniques, but also the incredible breadth and depth of the worldwide archetypal oral tradition, all part of library science for children.
I mean, this is amazing because, as you're telling this, I'm sitting in your classroom back in the 60s right now. And that would have been the best way for me to learn. I hated when I was told, go read these 5 pages and understand them. Because even when you're reading, if you're not absorbing it, if your mind is somewhere else, you're not learning. But as you're telling this story, it's like I'm visualizing it. I'm remembering pieces and parts that I wouldn't have if I would have just read it in a book.
Right, that's right. And so when I was using the word weaving storytelling project, we would call it a way into literature. So we would even perhaps, these teachers were wonderful. They would develop their own ideas, right? So they might have a difficult short story and they would learn how to create the frame and tell the frame for the short story. So they would do maybe the first few pages, in their own words, just starting the visualization process, starting the whole framework of the story, the beginning, and then let the students read the rest. So, it'd be a way into literature. But on the other hand, we wanted to share as well a way for students to tell the story back. So many times I would go into a school to field test it. I would tell maybe a ghost story. And then I would say, can you tell that back to me? And we'd go around the room and one would start sort of like a daisy chain. Okay, what happened next? What happened next? And pretty soon everyone is telling it as a group. So it was oral language, listening, speaking, learning through oral language, which is how we normally learn. And you're right, Elise, I did learn how to speak slowly. And I noticed some professional storytellers are much faster, but I feel that the more I can allow people to come with me and slow down the story, that they are able to keep track of it.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's how it all started out.
I love that slowness because it gives me and our listeners, and I'm sure listeners in the future, we can visualize. I can see Apollo. I can imagine the sun behind him. Yeah, if you're going too fast, it's like I'm constantly at the next word. I'm not really present. So I love that storytelling just brings me into the moment.
Oh,
And
good. Yeah.
it helps me to drop in. And I'm wondering, how can storytelling help us as we age? I mean, there's probably so many layers to that question, and I'm sure you have a lot of answers, but I know we think back, as we go through our life course. As a gerontologist, I say life course, and I know you talked to us a little bit about your memoir before. How does storytelling even evolve through different stages of life? But maybe the first question is, how can it help us age? And then if you want to take on the second question, how does it help us in each stage of life?
Right. So I think, especially I'll start out with this stage, with this stage. So yes, I know that sometimes remembering your family stories, and especially your own childhood stories, are incredibly valuable to you. Now, it's not necessarily true that your family might want to hear them. I'm lucky in that my son, whom I raised listening to stories, loves to hear my stories, because when he was little, I would tell him folk tales, nursery rhymes and little folk tales. And then we would talk about his own story, what happened that day. Like once upon a time, there was a little boy named Brendan, and he got up in the morning and then go through what he did that day. And he put on his new t-shirt that had a big dump truck right on the front. And he went to his play school and played with his friend Kenny. So then he'd add on to it. So we were starting to create stories from the beginning. And so he's open to just, okay, well, what's yours, right? And now he's 39 years old. So I suggest that if you are in this stage of life and you're willing to, maybe pick up this book and do some of the exercises. The very first chapter has to do with childhood stories, and follow through step by step to focus and remember and frame and craft, and then tell one, that it will be valuable to you. And in this way, first of all, it will give you a different perspective on your life journey. You become the narrator, not necessarily the one who experienced it, but the one who can step aside and tell it. And through the process of stepping to the side, framing it, crafting it as the narrator, you give yourself freedom to let the emotions unplug, so that you can see it more in a neutral way. But even more importantly than that, I think you can see the beginning of your own journey and what it meant. So what happened to me is I was teaching this class, mostly to elder women, and I made myself go through that exercise, the first one in the book. And as I did that, I realized that these stories that I was remembering, especially in middle childhood, ages 9 through 11, were so full of who I became, that they were the seed stories for my entire life. And, as an educator, I remember people saying in, Piaget and youth development, that middle childhood is the most potent time for anyone to understand who they truly are, because it's a time when magical thinking and logical thinking exist side by side.
Mhm.
So it's the ideal time to integrate the deeper sense of self with the more analytic application of self, if that makes sense. And even Jung mentioned, go back and see what you liked when you were 10 years old. So when I did this exercise, I realized, and I think many people will see this red thread. What is the red destiny thread? What is the through line to one's life? And if it started there, what was it? What are the threads that you see? And how did they continue to develop? So finally, once you've done that, it's so validating because you can notice the process of becoming who you are. And so you can continue to become who you are.
Interesting.
And then it's also wonderful to share that with your family or friends. So in this particular workshop, because it was online, some of the women decided to tape, videos of their childhood stories, even though they were very, very clear that those stories, well, let's just say they're defining stories or origin stories that were very important to them. But they wanted to make sure that their grandchildren would hear them and see them. So they're going to store them in the cloud, and those would be available for grandchildren and children who are willing to listen, and maybe in the future, more of the family would want to hear them. So childhood stories are very important for the aging process because it identifies a core self.
Wow. That was deep. And
Does that make sense?
yes. I always feel like when I'm with Kate, and she's going to be doing a storytelling. If you're listening to this before November 18th, 2021, she's going to be heading up a holiday storytelling event. And she did that last year. And it was like we were all around a fire listening. And that's how I feel when I'm with you. My face probably gets closer and closer to the camera. My heart is opening. Oh, yeah. Amazing.
Great. And the other thing about sharing childhood memories is also to share family legacy stories. So the ones that went back a few generations, that's up to the elders to remember. And if the elders can remember, put them in a journal, tape them, audio tape, videotape, whatever form. I'm lucky that in this book, there are 9 personal stories. And so for prosperity, but it doesn't have to be a published book. It could be a journal, especially like that. It could be an album with photos and stories, text, and so forth. But doing that kind of thing and sharing it as a legacy is also a way to elevate your experience of them and develop your role in your family. They're not going to necessarily give it to you.
You mean the older family members?
No, the younger.
Oh, the younger. Okay. Yeah. I like those two things. So you're saying with younger people, help them because help them tell a story. Right now, there's the youngest in my family, my immediate family is now a teenager, but we'll see what happens. But so you're saying with younger children, and I have taught children's yoga. So just to start having them tell stories about themselves, to develop this ability to story tell and almost see themselves from a different angle. Yeah, I
Right.
love that.
Right.
And that
I
it
think
sounds
that's very powerful. And then
Yeah.
if they don't have that sense of story as a valid way of communicating, you sort of have to develop it, and insist on it in a way.
One of the things that our younger generation has, and a lot of them are doing, they do record themselves. Okay. They record themselves, whether it be on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and they share tidbits. And I'm finding so many of them are actually journaling as well. They may not be as open about telling us about it, but as I shared with you before we went online, my 31-year-old son, he journals a lot. He writes music. Okay. And and each one is a story of something that he has experienced or he's witnessed somebody else experiencing. And I think today's generation, because technology is at their fingertips, they can do more with that. But I think sadly, the adult population is not listening to them as openly as we should. And I think we have to be more aware of the stories they're telling us, because some of them are very deep. And it's not like my childhood was. Okay. My childhood, was sort of easygoing. And then I look at some of them and it's like, it's hard out in this world. And if we don't listen, that thread that is creating them, who are they going to be when they become our age?
That's right.
I love that image of the red thread.
Right. That's actually an Asian folklore, is that the red thread is on your pinky finger. That's why it's called a pinky swear finger. Because if you swear on your pinky, that's the thread. And the thread connects to other people and your destiny throughout your life journey. So the red thread becomes, I think, as Karen said, if we don't notice where that thread is going, again, they may be lost.
Yes.
They may lose it. But I have to say the book and the workshops that I was doing before the lockdown were for the general public. So the book is actually for all, ages. And when I was doing the workshops in the San Francisco Public Library, it was amazing. We would just open it up. The library would announce, different branches. And 10 or 15 people would come. They were all diverse and they were all different ages. And what was interesting to me was they were more diverse than, they were more BIPOC than white, and definitely not all older. I think the non-white communities understand the oral tradition in a way that we in our high-tech world have kind of disregarded.
Interesting.
I have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, but what was so great about this range of random people is that by the end of our 90 minutes or 2 hours, we would have bonded, we would have understood one another's truths, we would have experienced different incidents in their life. And it was just so wholesome, just such a wholesome, good feeling. So my idea of story power is really to bring it into multi-generational settings and create this spontaneous community. So before the lockdown, the last one I did in January at West Portal Branch, again, a diverse group. They said, oh, this is so great. This is so heart-centered. We want to have a storytelling club. We want to come here every month and have different themes. So they were already planning it. And the library said, let's do it. And then, of course, it all shut down.
Well, you could always do it online through Zoom.
We could, but it's more difficult in the administration because
okay.
now it's all bureaucratic.
Yeah.
But once it starts opening up again, you know, I think we can definitely do that
Sure.
in public forums. Yeah. So, and that would be fantastic. I would love it.
I really want to attend one of those because there's so few activities that we can all do together, different generations, it seems. You know, sometimes I say eating. I teach intergenerational yoga classes, but there's not that many things that we all share. And there's so many, I'd say, divisional forces that try to divide us up and say, oh, this generation is this. And I don't buy into that, but it's easy to almost start to believe it yourself.
Right.
Right.
I wonder about having older adults remember their childhood, because I live with my parents who are 91 and 92. Do you have any tips to help get older, maybe somebody who's a generation or two above you, to have them tell their stories? Because I know, and I used to do that with my grandparents too. I would want them to talk about their lives, but sometimes they wanted to hear about me. So any tips on getting people to tell their stories that aren't kids?
Right. Well, there are prompts and exercises in the book, and there are also graphic organizers somewhere in here. So you could start with a mind map, you know what I mean? And kind of, or a storyboard, and just sketch out different ideas. But the book also includes 21 other voices of diversity, different people who give their own tips, ideas of how they get started with a story, and then they have a little story sample. So I think it's really good to think, well, there's not just one way to do it. But I think what might be a good one is to start with an object. So if you start with a memento, an object, and you say, what's the story behind this vase? You know, and why is it important, and who gave it to you, and why did they give it to you? Because then it's concrete, and they can touch it, feel it, kinetic, and begin to sort of try to remember, why was that important? That's one way. Another way is to use an album, look at photographs, go through scrapbooks and see what joggles a memory. And then finally to follow, this is what most of the new age professional storytellers do. They follow the emotion. So, which is another way into a story. So was there a time when you were a child, when you were scared? When you were really scared? Do you remember? What happened? Who was there? So again, prompt. What did it look like? Was it night? Was it day? Did you go up the stairs? Did you knock on the door? You know, and just sort of what we call in the business scaffolding in school. So you build it with them at the same time, recording. And then when they get to a flow about what happened in the end, then maybe, you can videotape it. But
It's
I think most people have, what do you think, Karen? Do you
well,
think
what
most people-
I find interesting, when my mother's last 2.5 months of life, she didn't know she was dying. We would talk to her every day and prompt her about things. And we learned things about her that she had never told us before. And when we went back and looked at albums and talked to other family members, we realized she knew what she was telling us. Okay. It wasn't that it was dementia sinking in. And it was so interesting because we just wanted to have a conversation with her. So we did prompt her. Okay. And I remember one of her home health aides said something to her about, Dorothy, your nails always look so beautiful. What makes you get a manicure all the time? And she went back to being a little girl that her sisters used to practice how to put nail polish on her so they could do it on each other. And, little things like this that just brought that bonding of my mother and her sisters together. So I think this is something that we all can easily do. And then if we use your book as a guide, it can even be a stronger bond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because each chapter is like a little essay. Would say, why is it important to remember childhood? What stories? Why is it important to remember family stories, not only for you, but for the family? Why is it important to tell family secrets? Why? And then, a little bit of research, just a little bit, and examples so that people have an idea. Yes, you need to really bring this out and share it so that we can have a fuller sense of self as we grow and as we become. And it really, what is the point of life anyway? But is to become the person you are. Sort of
I love
this
it.
circular journey.
Absolutely.
You work and you try and you do all this, and really you end at where you began. And if you've done a good job, that's how you end up.
Well, I think we've all been enraptured with your storytelling, your prompts, and I even want to listen to this over and over, read your book over and over, and become a better storyteller, become a better helper of other people telling their stories in my world, in my life. And I just want to say, I'm so grateful you came on. I hope you can come back again. I think Karen and I are going to try out these methods. And then, further on,
then you're going to tell your story, right?
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
we're going to have you back. Yeah. So thank you. Anything else you want to add, Karen?
Well, I think this conversation is really important at this time of year. We're going into the holidays. We have that opportunity to be around friends and family. Even some of us who may end up being alone, it might be a good time to reflect on the different stories. And I'm really excited about it because I am going to be with family for the first time in almost 12 years. So I'm looking forward to hearing stories and sharing stories. And maybe what we can do, Elise, is maybe after the first of the year is maybe get people together with Kate on Zoom, and maybe we could do a storytelling podcast. I think that would be fun.
That sounds great. Okay, we're gonna hold our feet to the fire and do that. And in the meantime, do you have any websites, or we'll put this all in the podcast notes, but anything else you want to share with our listeners, Kate? Where we can find you, get more of you.
Well, you have my website, kateferrell.net, and also my blog. But I think if you're interested in I don't know if you're interested in listening to other stories, you know, the Story Slam, the Moth has started to go live, but some storytelling events are still on Zoom, and there's so many of them. And they're really a combination. So they'll combine a traditional story with an authentic, true story around a theme. And they've exploded. I mean, there are all kinds of storytelling events, Midwest, East Coast, everywhere. And those are interesting as well, but I don't think they're the same as live, because when it's live, then you're really feeding off the energy of the audience, and the story goes in the direction that the audience takes it a little bit. But anyway, there's a lot going on online. But I did want to say that there's a Jewish story. Do we have about a minute to tell this
Sure.
Jewish story?
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, so this is a very old story about the Jewish tailor. So, you know, in the old country, the Jewish tailors used to sit in the window of their shop, a big picture window where the light was good. And this one tailor had an amazing tweed fabric. It was so beautiful. And as he cut it for his rich customer, he discovered he had enough left over for a jacket for himself. And he made the jacket. He loved it. He wore it every day. And he wore it out. But when he looked at that jacket, he saw he had just enough to make a vest. Oh, how he loved that vest. It kept him so warm. And he wore it almost every day in cold weather until he wore it out. But he looked at the vest and he saw that there was still just enough to make some covered buttons. And he made the buttons and put them on his favorite sweater. Oh, how he loved to finger those buttons and look at the gold and green and rust and brown threads. But as he wore those buttons, he wore them out. And when he was done, there was only just enough to tell a story. And that's the one I've told to you.
I love that. Thank you so much.
And so in the end, you're the narrator. That's all that's left. Your red thread and your life story. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Kate. Brava.
We will be back again soon, Elise, with another How to Super Age. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Bye.